One of the highlights of Michelle Obama's speech was this section.
That is the story of this country, the story that has brought me to this stage tonight, the story of generations of people who felt the lash of bondage, the shame of servitude, the sting of segregation, but who kept on striving and hoping and doing what needed to be done so that today I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves.
Okay, I actually cut off the rest of that line. It was a house that was built by slaves, but she looks out the window and sees her two black daughters playing with a dog on the lawn. And it's, of course, I think to most reasonable people, both a beautiful image, a beautiful historical transition that we've made, and also it's an acknowledgement of how far we've actually come. It's a good moment. But many conservatives heard that, and they just hear a reference to slavery, and they don't like that. And so Bill O'Reilly took it upon himself to explain what was actually going on during the construction of the White House and what the situation for the slaves during that time actually was.
History behind a remark is fascinating. George Washington selected the site in 1791 and has presently laid the cornerstone in 1792. Washington was then running the country out of Philadelphia. Slaves did participate in the construction of the White House. Records show about 400 payments made to slave masters between 795 and 1801. In addition, free blacks, whites, and immigrants also worked on the massive building. There were no illegal immigrants at that time. Slaves that worked there were well fed and had decent lodgings provided by the government, which stopped hiring slave labor in 1802. However, the feds did not forbid subcontractors from using slave labor. So Michelle Obama is essentially correct in citing slaves as builders of the White House, but there were others working as well.
So they were well fed and they had decent lodgings.
Well, you know
and
what I
he
just
knows
heard?
this because
Wow.
I heard for the first time just now, they stopped hiring slave labor.
Yeah.
Hiring
them.
slave labor.
I didn't think that's how it was run back in the day.
Right? It's like, God, that's unbelievable.
There is literally no shame with
Yeah.
Bill O'Reilly. Who would make the argument that slaves, I mean, the definition of a slave is someone who does not want to be there.
Yeah.
You know, someone who was forced to be someone's slave. And to say, well, they were well fed.
Yeah.
Look, we have slaves today in the world, usually sex slaves. And if you were a person who was atrocious enough of a human being, and you said, well, yes, it's true, she was captured at the age of 13 as a sex slave, but they did have good lodging and provided food for her.
Yeah.
You would be fairly monstrous.
Right.
Yeah.
And here it is. I mean, why? Why are you defending
It's so ridiculous.
any part of slavery in this way? What was the point of that segment?
Well,
we know.
I
We
mean-
know what the point of it is.
I
We
mean-
know his audience. We know the demographic. We know what it is. I mean, they're older. It's an older demographic that probably looks back at, you know, the time of very overt discrimination and segregation. And, you know, he's pandering to them. It's disgusting.
Devil's advocate, when he says the paying, he means hiring slave masters to build it with slaves. Maybe that's what he means. But
Yeah.
still, all of this
I'm sure
was,
that's true.
He was painting a golden age of they had good food, they had good lodgings, there were no illegal immigrants. It was all amazing what was going on there. And the thing is, we have to remember that it's not just that they're trying to portray slavery as having been sort of rewritten historically as this bad thing. And the images from about 100 years ago in early film of like the happy slave is the truth. It's that they actually believe that. They think that that's the truth. That's what actually happened. And I don't know how anyone could listen to what Michelle Obama said, which was a positive message of growth and transition and understanding and expansion of freedoms, and say, I'm going to make sure that they had good food. That's the response that you had to it.
Look, every time they force me to talk about the ugliness of slavery, so all she had was, just like John said, a positive message. We got beyond it. And now we had an African-American family. Isn't that great? She was saying, isn't that great? And they're like, that gets under my skin.
Yeah.
I don't like talking about the best. Okay, now, if you wanted a negative image, we could talk about what slavery really happened. I don't want to get into all the gruesome details again, the whippings and the scarrings. They could rape the slaves anytime they wanted. And you're going to try to put a positive spin on the lodging of the slaves? Just don't do that. There's no need for it. Don't make us get into this debate that's totally needless. Just say, yes, slaves were part of the people who built the White House. And it isn't amazing that we've come so far
Right.
that now there's African Americans in the White House. Wonderful. And let's move on.
So can I jump in, because Bill O'Reilly is, in my opinion, irrelevant, and soon will be even more irrelevant when he retires. Okay, as I mentioned, his audience is much older, and they love that kind of stuff. There were conservatives that were angry at Michelle Obama's speech because she had mentioned that. She got criticism for it. Of course, the vast majority of Americans loved it. But the one thing that I will say is, look, the Texas Board of Education wants to whitewash history in textbooks. And it's not just textbooks in Texas. These are textbooks that are going to be used by public schools throughout the country. They want to do away with civil rights leaders. They want to include conservative activists and essentially give you this rosy idea, or give children this rosy idea of what actually occurred in the country, which would be a complete and utter disaster. It's been a big story for years now. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because this goes beyond Bill O'Reilly. This has to do with this entire movement of spreading misinformation about our country's history. And you have to fight back against that. Texas's Board of Education is, controlled by very conservative members, and there has been some pushback against it. But obviously, the more information we have about it, the more we can fight back against it. We want to ensure that real information and real history is being taught to our students.
But also, when Bill O'Reilly goes away, there will be a new Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah.
He'll hand over the reins to somebody. And these are ugly people. These
Jesse
are really,
Waters.
really ugly people. And saying shit like that is really ugly and really dangerous and really bad. And as you said, Cenk, and she was trying to paint a beautiful picture of progress in our country, something that we should all rejoice at together. And he comes out with this nonsense. He's a fool, and it's an ugly thing.
Yeah, and it also it gets to, and I'll try to keep this brief, but it gets to the moral foundations of conservatism, and especially religious conservatives. One of the reasons conservative people tend to be more religious is that it's founded on an idea of hierarchy, and that hierarchies are not just pragmatic or efficient ways to run things, but they are the moral ways to run things. And when someone is in authority, they are there because they should be there. It's a moral declaration of superiority. And so you have, in our country's history, whites are superior to blacks, they're on top. Men are superior to women, the older are superior to younger, parents superior to children. That's why corporal punishment, very popular amongst that group. It's the moral thing to do when you discipline those who are down below. And so for them, you couldn't have had a system like slavery without a belief that it was the moral thing to do, that of course the people who are better, the people who are higher and stronger, they should be in charge of these lower groups of people. And that's why not only do they support that, but they support people like Roger Ailes, who want to make sure that even when women get into the workforce, they are kept below, because that's where they're supposed to be. That's their moral position.